Admittedly, I don't actually have that much to say about today's game, to be completely honest with you. It's a Sonic game and it's good. The end, that's it, I'm out, peace! No, I'm kidding. I have a little more to say about it than that. Of the various Sonic games, the one that receives the most universal acclaim is this one, Sonic Generations. Based on everything I said back in Sonic Colors, that makes perfect sense in hindsight, since Sonic Generations contains just a little bit of the things that most Sonic fans tend to enjoy. And it was obviously made with genuine care and interest. I mean, this was made as an anniversary game for the big anniversary, and I don't know, it just feels like they gave a damn a little bit more than usual in this one. A lot of polish is in this game. It's not that it's flawless, but you get what I mean. Now, but as I said earlier, the 2D stages are very much classic Sonic. They're probably the most classic Sonic I've seen since Classic Sonic, in all honesty. Stages that are... I mean, if they were to make a new Sonic game that was classic style Sonic, Sonic and Knuckles styles, this is what I'd want. It's really good, well-designed puzzle platforming with some fast-paced action to it, and yet and it's always 2D. At no point in time is it not 2D, and yet the stages and levels themselves are very 3D. There's so much to look at in the background. I found myself dying more often than not because I was admiring something that was going on in the background. And the background in some cases actually interacts with the foreground. My favorite example, of course, being Escape from the City, which had a great thing with the gun truck that's chasing you, how it'll go around and it'll hit pieces of the terrain which will change the way the layout of the stage works. And if you go quickly enough, you get ahead of the truck so you can do this thing and go to this shortcut, because if you don't do it quickly enough, the truck will come and smash that shortcut out of the way, stuff like that. Really, really well-designed stuff. Great stuff. But the modern Sonic stages, too, were also really, really well done, with only a few of the more irritating glitches and, whoops, I accidentally glitched through the ground because, oh well, kind of a problems they would have. Honestly, if it came down to purely modern Sonic gameplay, I'd say Sonic Colors is a little bit better, but Sonic Generations still does a really good job of it. So I can see why a lot of people would like this game, relatively speaking. Personally, Sonic Generations doesn't quite surpass Sonic Colors for me, but it certainly does come close. This is probably tied for my second favorite, right behind Sonic and Knuckles, or rather, right with, I should say, Sonic and Knuckles, if I should say. Because it's got a lot of things going for it. Now, number one is what I just mentioned. Good classic gameplay, good modern gameplay. Both of that was top-notch and really enjoyable, in my opinion. Again, to use the same example, Escape from the City, the gun stage, admittedly is not exactly difficult, but it was a lot of fun. And I really liked that. And admittedly, some of it came down to what is effectively a rails section. But that's the latter half. The former half of the Escape from the City section had lots of really fun, fast-paced, twitch or reflex or memorization style gameplay, and I like that. Second thing the game really has going for it is the skill customization thing. The mere fact that you can actually select and build a skill layout and have different abilities that you can buy from a store and whatnot is a great addition, and overall effectively pulls off the same thing that the various power-ups did back in Sonic Colors, aka varying gameplay just enough without actually going too far and really fundamentally changing the gameplay. And of course, the skill system lets you customize it. I only did a little bit of that on the stream, in fact virtually none, but I did a lot of messing around with the skills off camera in order to see what worked and what was this and what was that. Anybody who was paying attention probably saw me leaving the bubble shield on for a great deal of time. That was mostly for the classic Sonic levels, if you're curious. Overall, lots of good stuff there, though. The third thing this game really has going for it, and this is going to sound weird, is the lack of story. Now, I'm going to back up for a second here, because I got a little bit to talk about in this one. Sonic and story traditionally have not gone together particularly well. This is an odd situation, since most other franchises, other than, that started or on or before the Sonic series started, have since moved on to include story as a major element of them. Zelda, Mario, Mega Man, Metroid, all of these are big examples of this kind of thing. And they're not the only examples. Kid Icarus is arguably an example. It only has like 3 games to its number. Smash Brothers is arguably an example. So story getting more and more prevalent in games is not unusual. However, a lot of people are very, what's the word? Well, let's just say that not just have I seen this before, but as I asked during my live stream of this stuff over the previous weekend, a lot of people don't want a story in a Sonic game. Now me, I do want a story in a Sonic game. I'll be honest about that. However, I want a good story in a Sonic game, and Sonic games generally don't have good stories. That being said, story-wise, if you asked me which I believe was the best game for pure story of the Sonic series, it'd probably be Black Knight in all honesty. Sonic himself was basically exactly how I picture modern Sonic in terms of personality and attitude and whatnot, and there was a significant theme behind that whole thing, which actually felt like, more than just the usual, I don't know, go save the princess kind of a thing. So that's just my opinion, of course. However, and I want to point this out, this is probably just a coincidence, but of all the Sonic games, the one that focused on story the most, almost to the exclusion of gameplay, is Sonic 06. Now that is probably a coincidence. And I'm going to explain why, because Sonic 06 was not just terrible because it was a heavily story-focused game. It was terrible because it was a heavily story-focused game with a terrible story, with terrible voice acting, with terrible writing, with stilted cutscenes, with bad graphics, with terrible engine design problems, with load screens upon load screens upon loaded screens. Sonic 06 might as well be called Sonic: Loading because of how bad that is. Never mind the fact that the gameplay was always slow and stuttered and never really satisfying. The only positive thing, there's two positive things I can say about Sonic 06. The music, which is actually really damn good, and the fact that it's got that Mystery Science Theater 3000 factor. That's it. I've never heard anyone ever defend Sonic 06. Like the most defense I've ever heard it get is that it has that Mystery Science Theater 3000 factor. That's it. It's just that bad. But that brings me to Sonic Generations, a game that went out of its way to have less story focus than most of the modern games had. In fact, I would argue this game has about the same level of story as the old Genesis games had, and that can't be a coincidence. If you're discounting the inclusion of cutscenes, or rather are counting the cutscenes into the overall story element as it was portrayed with the miming back in Sonic and Knuckles, for example, yeah, it's about the same amount of story overall. In other words, let me just lay it out for you. Spoiler alert. Sonic's having a surprise party. Time thing sucks them into holes. Two Sonics. They beat the bad guys and restore time. The end. That's it. There really is no story here. And yet it is still competently presented. And this, I feel, is the key point. I have no doubt that Sonic Generations deliberately had less story to appeal to Sonic fans. But I do feel that what story is here it was done well enough to offset the absence of story for people who wanted a story, like myself. For example, the interactions between the two Robotniks are actually really telling, all things considered. The fact that the old Robotnik from the old days is a lot more level-headed, a lot more baseline, really just kind of a straight man, to the more modern Robotnik who is completely off his rocker. I actually want to talk about that a little bit. The idea that... Remember I mentioned back in Colors how ludicrous it was that Robotnik had built, a multi-planet-sized theme park as a cover for his story? That really left my head scratching until I played Generations, and it became clear that that was something being done deliberately in character on purpose. That Robotnik is at the point now where he has truly lost it, but rather than going raving, maniacal, I'm going to destroy everything and I'm going to be hideously evil like a lot of characters do when they completely lose it, he has basically gone batty. He does elaborate, insanely complicated schemes for the sake of doing them. I found myself asking the question at the beginning of this game, what is Robotnik's goal with this? Okay, he's got the time eater and he's going to eat time. He himself admits later on that he basically has no real goal with this. Time may be destroyed, but it'll be a time in which I have not been defeated by you, It's pretty clear he is not actually thinking ahead. Some villains have the whole do something stupid, ? Profit thing, right? As exemplified by South Park. In this case, Robotnik's thing is do something stupid. That's it. That's his plan, the do something stupid. That's as far as he gets. Except instead of stupid, it's something completely over the top. Remember how he made Eggman Land back in Sonic Unleashed? He did that. What was the point of doing that? What was his interest in doing that? What was his motivation? Remind you, this is a man who had a space fleet at the beginning of the game. A space fleet. He did that because... I get that very strong impression from the way his character's gone, and it's fascinating to see that contrasted with the old Robotnik, who looks at it as just like, huh? Wow. That being said, the other thing I want to comment on with the storyline thing is Sonic Generations is probably one of the most classic examples of a Type 2 time travel story I've ever seen. Let me explain my definitions. Type 1 time travel is best described by Final Fantasy VIII, in my opinion. In other words, the creators wanted to do a time travel story, and they sat down and they hammered out everything about how it's going to function and in what order, and they made it so it's all smooth and it all connects to itself and it all fits within its own rules of time. Because remember, every time travel story makes up its own rules for it because there are no rules for time travel. It's fiction, right? So they adhere to their own rules, and it all fits together neatly and tightly. And again, as I've said before, I think the plot of FF8 is one of its strongest features because of the tightness and significance of how that time travel storyline fits together without issue. Arguably with some holes, but I digress. That's the Type 1. Type 2 is a little bit more like, let's go time travel, and then here's the rest of the stuff. In other words, time travel is an excuse in order to get to the actual point of the story or game or whatever it is. By the way, just a little anecdote. It's funny because one of the best examples, in my opinion, of both a Type 1 and a Type 2 in the same work is Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Seriously. But I digress. So, a lot of times... Now, this is an interesting thing. I just want to talk about this for just a moment because I have actually approached several friends and said, can you name a good time travel story? And the answer was universally no. We couldn't actually come up with one. I have not been able to come up with a good one. I'm sure you guys will come up with one. But before you rush to the comments and tell me about all these stories that have time travel that are good in them, that's not what I mean. Can you tell me a story where the time travel part was really well done and is what made the story good? Now, I couldn't think of any. I could think of many stories that were good that included time travel. Most of the time, see, time travel is like the magic trick for writers and authors. It always has been and always will be. The idea of, I want to pull off this great thing because it's the kind of thing that is so very difficult to pull off and convincingly, and to make it engaging and interesting. Now, arguably one could say The Time Machine, the old one, the book, and debatably the first movie, are a good example of a good time travel story rather than a good story that includes time travel. But digressing from that, the point here is that time travel is so difficult to write that most of the times what people do is they will include time travel, but that's not what makes the story great. What made Back to the Future great? Well, the DeLorean was certainly awesome, and the time travel was crucial to it. But what made Back to the Future great was the writing, the directing, the acting of the characters. And I know that sounds like I'm cheating, but my point here is what really made Back to the Future more than just an average story was the great charisma and the great interactions and chemistry that the characters had each other. Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox both completely selling their parts. And the music, the incredible score, a lot of things made Back to the Future great. The time travel was one of them, but it was not the primary thing, at least in my opinion. This is what I mean by this. So a Type 2 time travel story is the most common type that you'll tend to see. Star Trek is a great example of this, which brings me back to Sonic Generations. I swear I'll talk about the game a little bit. Sonic Generations is like, time travel, and then go have fun. It is literally an excuse to go and play through renditions of older stages from previous games. And it works really well, I think. Honestly, I'm totally okay with that. And again, the story aspect of Generations could be summed by... I mean, there's no plot. I already summarized the plot. There's no theme at all. There's no setting development. So that's 3 of the 5 things just knocked out right at the bat. And yet one of the things I found interesting is they do some stuff with characters and character development in this one. Mostly with Robotnik, like I already said. A little bit with the Sonics. I really liked the bit how classic Sonic tried to start learning how to do the dash boost, like modern Sonic. In other words, causality loop. The modern Sonic taught the old Sonic how to do it by example, and then old Sonic learned how to do it, so modern Sonic went out, right? I like that. And there's a few things they did well with Tails that helped flesh him out a little bit. Just little stuff. So that's about as far as it goes as far as story. But again, well executed. I'm done talking about the story, honestly. There's one aspect, if you were paying attention earlier, I said there's 3 things that really elevate this game for me. One of them was the 2D classic stages, and the other was the skills. The third thing is the one I want to talk about the most, and that is the challenge stages. Now, back in Colors, I mentioned that the game encouraged you to replay it, which also encouraged you to get better at it. Generations kind of did that. I felt encouraged to go back and get S ranking. For those who don't know, you have to not only hit a certain time, but you have to not die at any point in the stage in order to get an S ranking. So that was encouraging and that was fun, but it only really took me 2 or 3 tries on most stages in order to get S ranking. That wasn't quite encouraging enough. And if you just play the main stages and what's required to get the keys and the emeralds, the whole game's going to take you like 5 or 6 hours to push through it. Maybe not even that long. But the challenge stages, that really helped flesh the game out for me. The challenge stages are the replay value. There's about 3 on average per stage, and that's 2D and modern. So, for example, Grass Hills had 6 or so challenges to it, 3 for modern and 3 for classic. And you can switch back and play through those, and there's a bunch of them, and they vary. They're in the same stages, so you help learn the stages better. So, for example, doing challenges can help you learn the stage better for going back and doing S ranking. But on top of that, they had gimmicks to them, and they actually changed the actors in the stages. Same basic terrain, but they alter this and this and that, add more of this, take away some of this, give you a new ability which helps you to get through certain aspects which have been added to it. Like I'll give you a direct example. In Crisis City, one of the modern, I believe, challenges was get through there with Blaze the Cat, who had an ability which is basically a water bomb that hits right in front of you that gets rid of any fire that happens to be there. And the whole stage was littered with fire, to the point where you basically had to use her very judiciously and cautiously, and oftentimes in midair, in order to be able to land at the place you're about to land at. And that was fun! And that's the key part right there. The challenges were fun. At no point did I find myself going, oh, I have to do another challenge. It was more like, okay, what's next? And once I finished the modern ones, I switched to classic, and I couldn't wait to try the classic ones, And yet, and this is crucially important, pay attention, future game developers, it's optional. You have to do 1 challenge per key, and it can be classic or modern, so you have full choice and freedom of range. And usually, there's a key and there's 4 challenges around it, so you can do any one of those challenges in order to unlock it on classic or modern. And then you have to do the emerald races with, let's see, that's Metal Sonic, Shadow, and Silver, of which the only one that actually irritated me was Silver. Blech. You guys saw that on the stream, although I'm surprised I managed to 2-shot that one. And that's it. It's all optional. That is incredibly good. Yes, keep it optional. And it even encourages you to go back and replay through it, because then you get a new ability, and of course you can go back and replay the challenges or mess up your skills. It's the best kind of additional content. It's additional content that you are not forced to do so, and in my opinion, and based on basic human psychology, you are therefore more likely to go ahead and actually want to go through and do. Maybe on your own time, maybe later, but it's something to keep it in the future. I intend to leave Sonic Generations installed because I still want to go through and 90% the game. I'm not going to 100% it. I'm not going to get all the red rings. That's the thing. But I'm going to get all the S ranks, and I'm going to get all the challenges done. Because I want to, because it's fun. That's great game design, in my opinion. Okay, so let's check my notes. I honestly don't have that many notes on this one, and you're probably seeing some repetition if you caught the stream, because I talked about a lot of these elements on the stream. I know I already mentioned this with regards to the DD stage, but this game is gorgeous, genuinely, amazingly, really, really beautiful. Ignoring the fact that this is a 4-year-old game now, I was genuinely impressed with the graphics quality, in addition to the aesthetic value of the graphics. So, just felt like probably my single favorite moment is in Spagonia, the Sonic Unleashed stage on Modern, when you're coming straight down the tower and you can see the town you're about to fly through, and it starts loading as you fly away, so you actually see the buildings you're about to be flying through. That's awesome. And there's lots of great moments like that. Planet Wisp had some good stuff. It's all over the place. Going back to the story thing for just a moment, I've always felt like Sonic is a series that would really do well in an RPG format. I know that sounds weird, but it's also worth noting that Mario made a successful RPG, and then made, well, arguably 2 separate entire chains of RPGs, the Paper Mario series and the Mario & Luigi series, both of which, with, I think, one exception, have all been pretty stellar games. The reason I feel this is the setting of Sonic seems built for something that is more story focused. They keep adding new characters, and there's all these different backgrounds. It is admittedly, as some people have called it, including myself, a little anime in the sense, like for example, Sonic 06. I hate to keep going back to it, but Sonic 06's story is very anime. There's this flame that grew to immense power that destroyed the world, but was split into two, and it goes through time in order to try and convince people, in order to reintegrate itself, and it actually kills Sonic. And then they go through time in order to prevent it from ever happening. And by the way, fun factoid. In canon, Sonic 06 never happened. In lore. Think about that. But I feel like this is a setting that would do well in an RPG format. The only question would be how to do it. Action RPG, turn-based RPG. I'm not sure on that, and as always, I welcome your guys' comments. But I mention this because I've actually seen a lot of fan fiction which really expounds on the Sonic storyline, which actually encouraged me to include Sonic in the Imperium, because there's a lot you can do with these characters. Sonic is not the Mario. He's very sarcastic, and yet he's very full of himself. He's very eager to help, but, you know, he's definitely kind of a show-off kind of a character. It's a unique kind of spin on the good guy, you know? And he's not rugged, and he's not dark or depressing. He's just there. And then there's Shadow, who's Vegeta, let's just say what it is, and so forth and so on, you know. But the point is, there's things you could do with these kind of characters, and I really would like to see something done with these characters someday before another Sonic Boom happens and completely ruins the franchise. By the way, Sonic Boom sucked. Moving on. The bosses in this game were actually a lot of fun, mostly because the arenas in which we fought were really fun to look around in, especially Shadow Stage and the Egg Dragoon. Both of those were a lot of fun to just enjoy the background while the fight's going on. None of the bosses were particularly engaging, but that's not surprising. Sonic games, for the most part, in my opinion at least, have never really been known for big, super amazing boss fights. They've been known for the good stages, and Sonic Generations definitely delivers on the great stages. Forgive me for going back to the source, but remember in Sonic 1, you know, the original, where a boss would consist of a Robotnik kind of floating over, and then you go psh, 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 and then that's the boss fight? Or how about when he comes out of the pit and you do this instead? You know, boss fights have never really been the thing for the Sonic series. They've always been fun to some extent, and actually pretty hard in some cases. The Death Egg robot in Sonic 2 is a good example of that. But overall, still enjoyable to play through, so that's a definite plus. One of the things I found myself thinking is, wouldn't it be more interesting if the cutscenes were fully silent, non-voice acted? Not all of them. Some of them should have voice acting. But on several occasions, there'd be a cutscene, like, for example, when the two Tailses come together, and the two Sonics come together, and they explain the bleedingly obvious. I actually replayed that cutscene in the little viewer play thing you get on the left where you can do that, and muted the sound, and honestly, it didn't really change my enjoyment of the scene all. Not really an offense towards the voice acting, but it's more a kind of a commentary on the way they were taking the story and wondering if maybe they should have done more of that. That being said, the scene where they have the big reveal with the two Robotniks, spoiler alert, that definitely should have been voice acted. That's definitely a great scene, obviously for the character reasons already mentioned, but in general it's very enjoyable and actually made me laugh twice, as you saw in the stream, so definitely keep that one. There's some implied horror in this game, believe it or not. And that brings me to, honestly, really the last thing I have to talk about. I'm sorry, this is going to be kind of a short video. The Time Eater itself, as ever, Sonic games tend to be tend to come up with more interesting things to talk about, to think about, rather than things that are, you know, really intellectually engaging as far as story or plot or whatever. The Time Eater is a great example of this. It's this random creature that has the ability to consume time. Now, of course, this isn't well defined, nor should it be. This is Type 2 time travel, after all. But the point being, it can drag people into a timeless state, which is that white space where the game takes place. And that is kind of an interesting concept in its own right. And I mentioned that implied horror. The idea of time being so ripped asunder that everything is part of this quiet, empty white space is kind of horrifying in its own right. But the other reason I found it horrifying is it's heavily implied, and Tails himself says something pretty clearly to this, that while people, living things, are stuck in that state of limbo, they're still aware. I'm reminded of Dragon Quest VII and the statue people, who were still conscious as their bodies slowly eroded over the course of years and years and years and years. It's just kind of one of those things that implies incredibly horrifying things, and thankfully we never had to get really too deep into that. Otherwise, that's just nightmare fuel right there. But the other interesting thing about the Time Eater is, number one, it looks really cool. It's got a great song too, Dominus Tempus. I don't even know what the song's actually called, but that's what they sing in the background. Such great music in Sonic games. The entire concept of a creature that can do what that thing can do is interesting in its own right, and actually encouraged me to include a creature more or less based on that in the Primus campaign. Spoiler alert. But the other thing I found interesting about it is it's the first creature that Robotnik has found that he has tried to take control of and succeeded at. Now, why is that? Well, the obvious reason could be because he had both Robotniks working on it. The other theory is that he has learned sufficiently from his old plans to fully roboticize this one. You notice that it is fully mechanical by the time we actually encounter it at the end. In other words, he didn't leave anything half-assed this time, and it actually succeeded. And yet, as usual, it's in the service of something that doesn't make any sense. Anyways, I don't really have anything else to say about the Time Eater, I guess. I guess it's just a fascinating concept, the idea of something that eats time. I'm reminded of the Time Devourer and the ways that was interesting over in Chrono Cross. Probably one of the few things that really engaged me mentally about Chrono Cross, that and Balthasar's plan. I guess that's really all I have to say. I apologize for the short video. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I hope you enjoyed the video. Next week we're going to something I'll be talking about a little bit more. A little bit. So, see you next time.